This is the Horse Radio Network.
This is episode 979 of Horse Tip Daily. A different horse tip, a different equine topic, a different equestrian expert every day. Horse Tip Daily brings the world of equine knowledge to you, one day at a time. Greetings, horse people. Coach Jen here, and thanks for tuning in to Horse Tip Daily. Today's tip is an excerpt from the Dressage Radio Show. Justin from Total Saddle Fit joins show co-hosts Reese Kofler-Stanfield and Philip Parks to answer some common saddle and girth fit questions. Things like girth length and saddle balance, frequency of reflocking and checking fit, and which is better, wool or foam. And we'll get right to our tip after this important message from Kentucky Performance Products.
This Nutrition Minute is brought to you by Kentucky Performance Products, the company that simplifies your search for research-proven nutritional supplements at kppusa.com.
The horse that matters to you matters to Kentucky Performance Products. Managing horses can be challenging. Each horse's personality affects the way he behaves and reacts to the world around him. Horses with certain dispositions can be at higher risk for developing health problems than others. High-strung or excitable horses are easily stressed, but so is the timid, quiet warrior. Stressed horses are more likely to develop digestive upsets that lead to colic, diarrhea, and ulcers. Nalox Advanced was specifically developed to support a digestive tract that is under stress. It sustains proper pH levels, reducing the incidence of ulcers and hindgut imbalances, while simultaneously supporting the healing of damaged tissues. Nalox Advanced supports the complete digestion of starches and sugars and sustains populations of beneficial bacteria. Make life a little easier on your sensitive horse and start him on Nalox Advanced today. To learn more about the ingredients in Nalox Advanced, visit Kentucky Performance Products at kppusa.com.
Well, Justin from Total Saddle Fit is back this week by popular demand. Everyone loved his segment we had on a couple weeks ago, and he's going to answer a few more frequently asked questions about saddle fit. So I hope you enjoy.
Thanks for having me, guys. I'm really thrilled to be back on.
Awesome. So we were talking, it was maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, about your saddle, well, your great girth, the Total Relief girth that you guys produce, and which the listeners were interested in, and so we got a couple of questions for you. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. The first one is pretty related to the Total Relief girth. Here is how to measure the girth best fit for your horse.
All right. Well, this applies to the shoulder relief girth and pretty much any other girth out there. So we won't play favorites. We'll apply this to everything. And there's a couple things to factor in. Because with girth, you can really have a huge swing in the sizing and still technically make it attach a saddle to a horse. But ideally, the first thing we want to look at, or the first way that we want to err, is in the direction of length. And it's generally better to err on the long side for a handful of reasons. One, it's better weight distribution over the surface of the girth. So, if you're putting, no matter how you look at it, you're going to put a little pressure on your horse when you're attaching your saddle, so might as well disperse that pressure the most you can. Second, you don't want it to be too short because the buckles might run into the horse's elbow. So we want to keep that out of the way. And then thirdly, the horse's pectoral muscles run kind of in that lower area where a short girth might be. So we don't want the edge of our girth to be resting on the pectoral muscles and risk any kind of, pressure point there. So we err on the longer side, which that ends up being like a kind of a ballpark, 4 to 6 inches from the bottom of the saddle flap from the end of the girth tends to be a pretty good sweet spot.
Okay, excellent. And the next question is related to our last interview, but we talked about tips about a balanced saddle. The listener was taught that the lowest part of the saddle seat should be parallel with the horse's back. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, and what we spoke about last time, I think the way that I explained it was a ballpark sort of rule of thumb would be that the pommel and the cantle would be level. And when the listener wrote in and said, well, I thought it was the lowest point in the seat, ultimately we're saying the same thing. We're looking for that center, more or less center balance and levelness for that even weight distribution. So the low point in the seat's a great rule of thumb to use as well. I just find visually, if you try to look at it, pommel to cantle, it's a little easier to see.
Excellent. Now, Reese, did you come up with some questions maybe today about
I did.
asking around the barn a little bit?
Yeah, it was a big topic around the barn that you were coming in. And I said, okay, everybody, what are your saddle fitting questions? And one of the questions that came up was, how often should you have your saddle reflocked?
That is a good question. And I wish I had a perfect answer for you. But the fact of it is, it depends. Now, if we're going to go with a really big, kind of like a ballpark, I'd say every 3 to 9 months. And if we're going to, like an average would be about every 6 months. But it's going to vary from horse to horse and rider to rider. The main things that make it fluctuate is usually, well, first off, how much you ride. Because, some people can ride 10 times in 6 months. Some people can ride, 100 times or more probably. But a horse that might have maybe a thoroughbred that's got, narrow, high withers, they're usually going to break a saddle in quicker, or rather even break down the wool in the saddle much more quickly because of the horse's conformation. Now, if you have a broader horse, and mind you, I'm sort of speaking in generalities here, but if you have a broader horse, they'll carry the saddle a little bit better so it doesn't break down quite as quickly. So that can sort of give you a general idea. Your more narrow kind of horses usually are a little bit more frequent, and the broader horses are a little bit less frequent. But it's hard to give an exact answer. So if you held a gun to me, I'd say every 6 months.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that's realistic. I mean, it's hard. Like here in Kentucky, we get quite a bit of, spring and fall, we have saddle fitters that come in for the horse show. So it works out pretty well for me. But I know, I have students that live in the middle of, Kansas or wherever, and it's hard to get a saddle fit. So I think that's a good kind of generality every 6 months, maybe twice a year if you're riding a lot. I like that.
Totally. And that's, kind of taking it back to the balance thing that we were talking about a few weeks ago and just a minute ago. That's a really good tell. If your saddle was balanced and it starts kind of going askew one way or the other, that's a really good time when even it might still feel comfortable for you. That's a great little tell to let you know that probably time to, if not get a flock, at least get it checked.
That makes sense. So all of us, and I'm guilty of this too, and I try not to. I try to check the saddles as much as I can. When you're putting your saddle on your horse, how often should you be really critical about the saddle fit? Like really look at the balance. Some of us we're tired after work, or you get on another horse and you don't really pay attention. But what's a good way to tell every 6 weeks? I mean, should you mark it on your calendar the first of the month? Look at your saddle. Is there something like that people can think about?
Yeah, that's a really good question because honestly, if you check it every single day, you probably won't notice any changes because it's like if you've ever tried to lose weight, if you step on the scale every 6 hours, what you're going to be pretty bummed. You're not going to notice the change, from day to day. So I think making sure you have enough time in between checks once a month, I think would be a great frequency to really give it a good look. And I'll even add a little bit additional to that, which is check it with no pads underneath. And that's not to say that you'd ride without pads, but just girth the saddle up, girth it up tight as if you were going to ride with no pads, and that'll give you a much clearer idea of what's going on. Pads can sometimes mask things that are going on, and sometimes pads can be used to correct saddle fit. But to get a very pure view of what's going on, check it with no pads, girthed up tight.
And I guess that brings kind of another question for me. When we do saddle fitting, we typically ride without the saddle pad if the horse can handle it. I've had a couple that can't, but we typically ride without the saddle pad to check kind of the dust marks of the saddle. Is that something to do when you do that check?
Yeah, that is good. Dust marks and even sweat marks to some extent can occasionally, be a little bit misleading because there's so much left up to, interpretation, like a sort of user interpretation, potentially user error. So if someone is educated and knows what they're looking for, I think that's definitely helpful. And even whether someone knows much about saddle fit or not, if you have a suspicion, checking something like sweat marks or dust marks can really help you either confirm or disprove what you might be thinking is going on.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense, because that's how I know that we do it, and I try to really look once our guys are here and checking. So no, that's a really good idea. So on another kind of topic, this was the barn talk today. You hear a lot, and not talking about brands of saddles, but you hear a lot about saddles that are kind of foam, or you hear wool, or can you talk a little bit about the difference in like a wool flock saddle to a memory foam saddle? I know there's a new memory foam out. How do you kind of differentiate when you go to buy a saddle? It's kind of confusing to know.
Yeah, air was a big thing not too long ago. It seems very trendy.
Yeah. How do you know?
Yeah. Well, this is a bit of a contentious topic, depending on who you're talking. Who you're talking.
Way to ask the tough questions.
No. I think it's a really great question. But the reason I say it's a contentious topic is because it all depends who you're talking to and what they're trying to sell you.
Yeah,
first and foremost.
exactly.
That's always the case.
Right, exactly. That's why I asked you, because it's like, wait a minute, that's very confusing.
What I find is a nice little sort of check and balance on this whole debate is what happens when you talk to independent saddle fitters that are not selling, they're not representing any saddle brand. It's more about what are they, like, the independent saddle fitters that go around and do a lot more adjustments and fit checks as opposed to saddle sales. And they, without doubt, always err toward wool. And I'm in the wool camp as well. The reason being a couple things. One, wool is just a bunch of little particles. So the way it breaks in and settles to a horse's back, it has like a sort of a molding effect. It can really, over time, it's a natural fiber and it molds to your horse's back. So that's the first benefit of wool. The second is that you can fine tune it and adjust it over the life of the saddle. It's like a car where you're changing the oil to make sure the engine's always running properly. It's kind of the same concept. Your horse is never going to stay the same shape, from now until 6 months from now until 6 months from then. He's always going to be changing, whether it's muscling or climate changes, winter to summer kind of stuff. So you want to keep up on that and make sure that the weight distribution, the balance, all of that's on point. And the wool really helps you do it because you can make little tweaks here and there. Now, I don't want to totally discredit foam and say, it's the worst stuff ever. If you get a memory foam saddle that happens to fit the shape of your horse's top line, the width of his spine, the balance and everything really, really well, then that can work as well. It's just in practice, it's so rare that you can check every little box with the foam panel saddles, just because they come from the factory with one, relatively rigid shape, and then you have to work with that. You can do some shim padding and stuff, which is helpful, but the wool just gives you a lot of flexibility.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's funny. It just in anything, even, there are fancy stirrups out there, and I'm sort of an old school soul, I guess. It's like I've always had a wool saddle. I've always had basic stirrup and leather, irons. I'm weird about that kind of stuff, so I'm always a little leery myself. And I've had, I have somebody come in every 6 months for the saddles and are able to adjust it with the wool. So I think I guess I'm old school. So I don't 100%. I'm kind of old school, I guess. So no, that really makes sense, because that's a big one when you go to try saddles. And I'd love to hear your opinion. So, a lot of times, and we're lucky, at least here in Lexington, that we have Rolex every year. And yeah. I typically tell my students, okay, if they're looking for a new saddle, I try to wait till April where you can go and sit in a lot of saddles. And then, again, we're lucky enough, typically we can get people to come out after the show or whatever to come fit the horses here.
Well, there you go. Thanks again to Justin from Total Saddle Fit for the tips. You can find him on the web at totalsaddlefit.com. You can listen to the Dressage Radio Show every week at dressageradio.com or by downloading the free Horse Radio Network app for iPhone or Android. Just go to your app store and search Horse Radio Network. Download it today. It's quick, it's free, it's easy. This podcast has been made possible through the generous support of Kentucky Performance Products and listeners like you. The Horse Radio Network and the Horse Radio Network hosts are not responsible for statements of guests or their opinions. Use your own judgment when listening to the tips provided by the experts on Horse Tip Daily.